The massive space station hung in the void like a giant metal flower. Its arms stretched out in all directions around the neutral moon of Kepler 442c. This was the home of the Galactic Coordination Council, where hundreds of different alien species came together to talk about important matters that affected the galaxy. Today was one of those special days when representatives from every corner of known space gathered in the Great Assembly Hall. Commander Jake Morrison walked through the long corridors toward the main chamber. He wore the dark blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, and his boots made soft sounds on the metal floor. Jake had served in the human military for 20 years before taking this job as humanity's voice in the council. He was a tall man with short brown hair and serious eyes that had seen too many battles. Today felt different, though, and he could not shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. The assembly hall was enormous. It could hold 10,000 beings easily, and today it was almost full. Jake looked around at the incredible sight before him. There were the tall, thin ethereals with their glowing skin that seemed to shine from within. The rock-like granite people sat in their special heavy chairs that could support their massive weight. In one section, the floating gas beings from the nebula worlds drifted in their protective bubbles, and scattered throughout were dozens of other species, each more strange and wonderful than the last. Jake found his seat in the human section. Ambassador Lisa Grant was already there, going through her notes one more time. Lisa was younger than Jake, maybe 35, with blonde hair pulled back in a neat style. She had studied alien cultures for most of her adult life and knew more about galactic politics than almost anyone from Earth. "Any word on what the Zephyrians want to discuss today?" Jake asked as he sat down beside her. Lisa shook her head. "Nothing official, but I heard rumors that Counselor Vexthara requested special speaking time. That usually means trouble." Jake knew about Vexthara. The Zephyrian was known throughout the council for his strong opinions and his belief that his people were better than most other species. The Zephyrians looked almost like living crystals, with bodies that seemed to be made of clear blue stone that caught and reflected light in beautiful ways. They were an old civilization and very proud of their long history. High Arbiter Qualden stepped up to the speaking platform at the center of the hall. The ancient ethereal's voice carried easily through the chamber without any need for amplification. His people had learned to speak directly to the minds of others centuries ago. "We gather today to discuss matters of territorial expansion and colonization rights," Qualden announced. "The first item concerns humanity's request for settlement. Permits in 3 uninhabited systems in the Outer Rim sectors." Jake stood up when his turn came to speak. The hall grew quiet as thousands of alien eyes turned toward him. He had done this many times before, but it never got easier. "Honored representatives," Jake began, "humanity requests permission to establish colonies in the Ross 47, Kepler 438, and Volf 1061 systems. Our surveys show these systems contain habitable worlds with no intelligent life. We pledge to follow all galactic environmental protection laws and to respect any archaeological sites we might discover." The request was simple and straightforward. Humanity had been expanding slowly and carefully for the past 50 years since making contact with galactic civilization. They always followed the rules and never caused problems for their neighbors. Several species asked routine questions about the proposed colonies. The granite people wanted to know about mining rights. The Aquatic Union asked about water world protections. Jake answered each question calmly and professionally. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until Counselor Vexthara stood up. The Zephyrian's crystalline body caught the chamber's lights and threw rainbows across the walls. He was tall, even for his species, and his angular features gave him a sharp, dangerous look. When he spoke, his voice was cold and cutting. "I object to this request," Vexthara declared. "Humanity has no business expanding further into the galaxy. They are violent primitives who have barely learned to leave their own solar system. In the short time they have been part of this council, they have shown nothing but aggression and disrespect for older, wiser civilizations." A shocked silence fell over the assembly hall. Jake felt his jaw tighten, but he remained calm. Personal attacks were unusual in council meetings, but not completely unknown. Vexthora was not finished. He stepped closer to the center of the chamber, his crystal form gleaming with an inner light that seemed to pulse with his emotions. "These humans think they can take whatever they want from the galaxy," he continued, his voice growing louder. "They wage wars on their own homeworld. They destroy their environment. They show no respect for the natural order that has kept peace in this galaxy for thousands of years." Other representatives began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. This was going far beyond normal diplomatic disagreement. "I speak not just for myself, but for all civilized species when I say that humanity's expansion must be stopped," Vexthara declared. "And if the humans attempt to colonize these systems against the wishes of their betters, the Zephyrian Empire will take action to cleanse the galaxy of the human infestation once and for all." The word "cleanse" hit the chamber like a physical blow. Gasps and shocked exclamations came from all around the hall. Threats of genocide were forbidden under the most basic galactic laws. No species had made such a threat in over 300 years. High Arbiter Qualden's glowing form flared brighter with obvious anger. "Counselor Vexthara, you will retract that statement immediately. Threats against entire civilizations violate our most sacred laws." But Vexthara stood firm, his crystal face showing no regret. "I retract nothing. The humans must learn their place or they will be taught it." Jake rose slowly from his seat. Every being in the chamber watched him, waiting to see how humanity would respond to such an unprecedented threat. He walked calmly to the speaking platform, his face showing no emotion. "Counselor Vexthara," Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall, "humanity thanks you for making your position so clear. We will proceed with our legal colonization efforts as planned. If the Zephyrian Empire chooses to interfere with lawful human activities, we will respond appropriately." The two beings stared at each other across the chamber. One was crystal and light, ancient and proud. The other was flesh and blood, young and determined. "Neither back down, High Arbiter." Qualden finally broke the tension. "This session is adjourned. All parties will have time to consider their positions before we reconvene." As the representatives began to file out of the chamber, Jake could hear them whispering among themselves. Some seemed shocked by Vexthara's threat. Others appeared worried about what might happen next. A few species that had often clashed with humanity seemed pleased by the confrontation. Lisa caught up with Jake as he headed for the exit. "What do you think he was trying to accomplish?" she asked quietly. Jake looked back at Vexthara, who was surrounded by other Zephyrian representatives. They seemed to be arguing among themselves. "I think he just made the biggest mistake of his life," Jake replied. "And I have a feeling his own people are starting to realize it too." 3 weeks had passed since the incident at the Galactic Council, and Earth's leadership was taking the Zephyrian threat very seriously. In a secure conference room deep beneath the capital city of New Geneva, the most important people in human space sat around a long table covered with documents and data displays. Admiral Kate Sullivan commanded all of humanity's colonial defense forces. She was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Kate had spent her entire career preparing for threats that might come from the depths of space, but she had never expected one to be announced so publicly. "The intelligence reports are clear," she said, pointing to a holographic display that showed ship movements near human space. "The Zephyrians have been moving military vessels toward our borders for the past 2 weeks. They're not trying to hide it either." President Elena Rodriguez sat at the head of the table. She was the elected leader of Earth and all human colonies, a position that required her to make decisions that could affect the survival of their entire species. Elena was younger than most people expected for such an important job, but she had proven herself capable during several previous crises. "How many ships are we talking about?" Elena asked. Dr. Marcus Webb, the chief strategist and expert on alien cultures, pulled up another display. Marcus was a thin man with thick glasses who seemed more comfortable with books than battlefields, but his understanding of how different species thought had saved human lives many times before. Our scouts report at least 200 Zephyrian warships in the region, Marcus said. That's more than enough to overwhelm our current colonial defenses if they attack all at once. Captain Roy Henderson had been called in from the outer system where his ship was conducting training exercises. The HMS Defiance was humanity's newest and most powerful warship, though few people outside this room knew just how advanced it really was. Roy was a career military man who had worked his way up from the lowest ranks through skill and determination. What about their capabilities? Roy asked. Do we know what kind of weapons and defenses they're carrying? Admiral Sullivan nodded. Grimly. Standard Zephyrian crystal-based energy weapons and particle shields. Powerful, but not beyond what we expected. The problem is numbers. They have us outnumbered at least 5-1 in that region. Dr. Webb cleared his throat. There's something else we need to consider. I've been analyzing Counselor Vexthara's speech and comparing it to official Zephyrian government statements from the past year. I don't think he was speaking for his government when he made those threats. This got everyone's attention. Elena leaned forward. Explain. The Zephyrian Empire has always been aggressive, but they're also very careful about following galactic law. Genocide threats violate treaties they've signed. More importantly, their military doctrine has always focused on defense of their core systems, not offensive operations in distant regions. What Vexthara described would require them to completely change their entire strategic approach. Admiral Sullivan frowned. Are you saying he was bluffing? I'm saying he might have been acting on his own without official approval. But that doesn't make him less dangerous? If he has enough personal influence to mobilize those ships, he could start a war whether his government wants one or not. President Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, considering all the information. Finally, she spoke. We have to assume the threat is real, regardless of whether it's official. What are our options? Admiral Sullivan activated another display, showing human fleet positions throughout their territory. We can reinforce the colonial systems, but it will take time to move enough ships to make a real difference. Our best vessels are scattered across dozens of systems on routine patrols. Captain Henderson studied the tactical situation. What if we don't try to match their numbers? What if we use mobility and surprise instead? Go on, Elena said. The Zephyrians are expecting us to fight a defensive battle around our colonies. They'll bring overwhelming force to crush our fixed positions. But what if we don't give them fixed positions to attack? Dr. Webb looked intrigued. You're talking about mobile warfare, hit and run tactics. Exactly. We can't win a straight fight against 5-1 odds, but we don't have to fight straight. Human ships are faster and more maneuverable than Zephyrian vessels. We use that advantage. Admiral Sullivan was already running calculations in her head. It could work, but we'd need to coordinate across multiple systems simultaneously. And we'd need to make sure our colonies are protected while our fleets are operating elsewhere. I have an idea about that too, Henderson said. What if the colonies aren't as defenseless as they appear? Over the next hour, they worked out a plan. That was risky, but might give humanity a real chance if war came. The new colonies would be established on schedule, but with hidden military installations that could defend themselves. Human warships would be positioned throughout the region, disguised as civilian vessels or hidden in asteroid fields and gas clouds. Most importantly, they would not wait for the Zephyrians to attack. If hostile alien ships entered human space, they would be met with immediate and overwhelming force. And there's one more thing, President Rodriguez said as the meeting was ending. We need to make sure the other galactic civilizations understand what's happening here. If this goes badly, we don't want them thinking we started it. Dr. Webb nodded. I'll prepare a complete report of Zephyrian military movements and treaty violations. When the time comes, we'll have evidence to support our actions. 2 days later, Captain Henderson's ship departed Earth orbit on what appeared to be a routine supply mission to the outer colonies. But the HMS Defiance was carrying much more than supplies. Hidden in her cargo holds were advanced weapon systems and sensor arrays that would be secretly installed on the new colonial worlds. The ship itself had been modified in ways that weren't obvious from the outside. Her hull looked like any other human vessel, but beneath the standard armor plating were layers of advanced materials that could absorb or deflect most known weapon types. Her engines were more powerful than anything the Zephyrians had seen, and her weapon systems incorporated technology that humanity had been developing in secret for years. Roy Henderson stood on his ship's bridge as they approached the first colonial system. Through the viewports, he could see the beautiful blue and green world that would become humanity's newest home. Construction ships were already in orbit, beginning work on the surface installations that would support thousands of human families. "Captain," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from one of our scout ships in the outer system. They report Zephyrian vessels on long-range sensors." Henderson nodded calmly. "How many ships and how far out?" 12 vessels, sir. They're holding position just outside the system boundary, but they're definitely watching us." "Acknowledged. Continue with the mission as planned. If they want to watch, let them watch. They might learn something." What the Zephyrian observers didn't realize was that they were watching a carefully prepared show. The human ships moved with purpose and efficiency, but they appeared to be doing exactly what their official reports claimed, establishing a peaceful colony on an uninhabited world. Hidden beneath the surface, however, a different kind of construction was taking place. Automated systems were carving out underground facilities that could house defensive weapons and shield generators. Communication arrays were being installed that could coordinate with human fleets across dozens of systems simultaneously. Most importantly, manufacturing facilities were being built that could produce advanced military equipment far from Earth's industrial centers. Similar preparations were taking place in the other two colonial systems. Within weeks, humanity would have 3 heavily fortified positions in the disputed region, each capable of defending itself and supporting offensive operations against any threat. The Zephyrians continued their surveillance. Reportia? Their commanders that the humans were proceeding with colonization as announced. They saw cargo ships and construction vessels, civilian transports carrying families to new homes, and survey teams mapping out cities and farmland. What they missed were the military transports that arrived during carefully timed sensor blackouts, the weapon shipments disguised as agricultural equipment, and the combat engineers who worked alongside civilian construction crews to build installations that served dual purposes. Captain Henderson smiled grimly as he watched the latest intelligence reports from his hidden observers throughout the region. The Zephyrians were so confident in their superiority that they weren't even trying to hide their preparations for war. Their fleet positions, supply lines, and communication patterns were all visible to human sensors. "They think we're primitives," he said to his first officer. "They think we'll panic and run when they show up with their superior numbers and advanced technology. They're about to learn that humanity didn't survive this long by running from fights." The first test came sooner than expected. A human merchant ship carrying supplies to one of the new colonies was intercepted by a Zephyrian patrol. The aliens ordered the human vessel to submit to inspection, claiming they had authority to search ships in what they considered disputed territory. The merchant captain. The crystal spires of Zephyr Prime reached high into the planet's purple sky, their surfaces reflecting the light of twin suns in brilliant displays of color. This was the heart of the Zephyrian Empire, home to billions of crystal beings who had ruled over dozens of star systems for thousands of years. But today, the beauty of the capital city could not hide the growing crisis that threatened to tear the empire apart. Empress Calandra stood in her private chambers at the top of the highest spire, looking out over the city she had ruled for 3 centuries. Her crystalline form was more elegant than most of her people, with delicate features that seemed carved by master artists. But her inner light, which normally glowed with calm authority, now flickered with worry and anger. A soft chime announced the arrival of her visitor. General Morgeth entered the chamber, his massive crystal body reflecting the room's light in sharp military patterns. He was one of the Empire's most experienced commanders, having led Zephyrian forces in dozens of conflicts over the past 200 years. "Your Imperial Majesty," he said, bowing his head in respect. "I have the reports you requested about the situation in human space." Calandra turned from the window. "Tell me everything, old friend, and please speak freely. I need to know exactly how bad this has become." Morgoth activated a holographic display that showed the region where human and Zephyrian forces were now facing each other. Red markers indicated the positions of Imperial warships, while blue dots showed known human vessels. "The news is not good, Majesty. 3 days ago, one of our patrol groups attempted to inspect a human merchant vessel in the disputed zone. The encounter resulted in the destruction of 2 of our ships and severe damage to a third. The Empress's light flared brighter with shock. A merchant ship destroyed 2 military vessels? How is that possible? According to the surviving crew members, the human ship was heavily armed with weapons far more advanced than our intelligence," reports suggested. They also report that the human vessel used some kind of stealth technology that made it difficult to target effectively. Calandra moved to her throne, a magnificent crystal formation that had been grown rather than built. "General, I want you to answer one question honestly. In your professional opinion, are we prepared to fight a war against humanity?" Morgoth was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. "Majesty, when your brother first spoke of taking action against the humans, I assumed we would be facing a primitive species with limited military capabilities. Our intelligence suggested they had perhaps 50 warships total, with weapons technology inferior to our own. And now? Now I believe our intelligence was completely wrong. The humans have been hiding their true capabilities, possibly for decades. Their ships are faster, better armed, and more advanced than we thought. More importantly, they seem to understand modern warfare tactics better than we gave them credit for." The Empress felt a cold fear settle in her crystal heart. "How many human ships do you estimate are actually in the region?" "Unknown, Majesty. They're using stealth technology and deception methods that make accurate counts impossible. We thought we were facing perhaps a dozen vessels. Now I suspect the number might be 10 times that or even more." Intelligence Chief Hexara materialized. In the doorway, her slim crystal form moving with the silent grace of a professional spy. She had served the royal family for over a century, gathering information from across the galaxy. "Your Majesty," she said, "I have urgent news from our network of informants throughout galactic civilization. The humans have been much busier than we realized." Calandra gestured for her to continue. "For the past 20 years, humanity has been quietly building military alliances with dozens of smaller species. They've been sharing technology, providing protection, and building economic partnerships. Many civilizations that we assumed were neutral now have significant ties to human space. What does that mean for us?" Morgoth asked. "It means that if we go to war with humanity, we won't just be fighting humans. We'll be fighting their allies. As well, the Aquatic Union has already issued a statement supporting human colonization rights. The Granite people have moved several of their defense fleets to positions where they could threaten our supply lines. Even some species within our own sphere of influence are questioning our actions." The full scope of the disaster was beginning to become clear to Empress Calandra. Her brother's arrogant threats hadn't just started a conflict with humanity. They had potentially turned most of the galaxy against the Zephyrian Empire. "Where is Vexthara now?" she asked. "He has taken command of the forward fleet," Hexara replied. "He claims he's acting under emergency war powers granted by ancient imperial law. Many of the younger commanders support him, believing that a quick victory against the humans will restore our prestige." "And the older commanders?" General Morgoth's light dimmed slightly. "They have concerns, but they follow orders. Military discipline runs deep in our forces." The Empress rose from her throne and began pacing around the chamber. This was the worst crisis of her long reign, and it had been caused by her own brother's foolishness and ambition. "Explain to me how this happened," she said. How did Vextara gain the authority to threaten an entire species without my knowledge? Intelligence Chief Hexara pulled up another display, this one showing communication records and political connections within the Imperial government. Your brother has been building a power base for years, Majesty. He's been using his position on the Galactic Council to make connections with military leaders, noble families, and industrial corporations. Many of them believe the Empire has become too cautious under your rule. They think I'm weak, Calandra said bitterly. They think the Empire should be expanding aggressively instead of maintaining the status quo. Vextara has convinced them that humanity represents both a threat and an opportunity. Defeat the humans, he claims, and the Empire will gain access to their territory and resources while demonstrating strength to the rest of the galaxy. General Morgoth shook his head. What he's actually done is provoke a conflict we're not prepared to win. The humans aren't some primitive species we can crush with superior numbers. They're a modern military power with capabilities we don't fully understand. The Empress stopped pacing and looked at her two most trusted advisors. Can this be stopped? Is there a way to end this before it destroys us? That depends on your brother, Hexara said. If he's willing to withdraw and publicly apologize for his threats, the humans might be willing to negotiate. But everything I know about Vextara suggests he'll see any retreat as unacceptable weakness. And if he refuses? Then we'll have a civil war within the Empire at the same time we're fighting an external enemy we can't defeat, Morgoth said. Grimly, the Empire won't survive that combination. A new chime announced another visitor. This time it was Prince Dexalan, Calandra's youngest brother and the only member of the royal family who had openly opposed Vexthara's actions from the beginning. Sister, he said urgently, you need to see the latest reports from the frontier. Vexthara has ordered attacks on human supply convoys. The war has officially begun. The Empress felt her crystal form grow cold. How many casualties? Unknown. The attacks just happened a few hours ago. But our forces are reporting much heavier resistance than expected. Several of our attack groups have failed to report back at all. General Morgoth's military instincts took over. I need to return to Fleet Command immediately. If we're committed to this conflict, our forces need proper coordination and support. Wait, the Empress said. Before you go, I need to know one more thing. In your honest assessment, what are our chances of winning this war? The general's inner light pulsed slowly as he considered the question. If we fight the kind of war Vexthara wants to fight, with direct assaults and overwhelming force, I estimate our chances at less than 30%. The humans are too well prepared and too technologically advanced. And if we fight smart? If we use our full resources, call in favors from our allies, and adopt more flexible tactics, we might raise those odds to 50%. But that would require Vexthara to give up command to more experienced officers, and I don't see him doing that willingly. The Empress made her decision. General, you have my authority to take whatever actions you deem necessary to protect Imperial forces and citizens. If that means countermanding my brother's orders, so be it. Your Majesty, that could be seen as treason by Vexthara's supporters. Let me worry about the politics. You focus on keeping our people alive. As her advisors left to carry out their duties, Empress Calandra remained alone in her chamber, looking out over the crystal city that might soon be under threat if this war went badly. She had ruled the Zephyrian Empire through peace and prosperity for 3 centuries, but now her brother's arrogance might destroy everything their ancestors had built. She activated a private communication channel that only she and a few trusted agents knew about. Within moments, a holographic figure appeared before her. I need you to make contact with human leadership, she said to the image. Tell them that not all Zephyrians support this war. If there's a way to end this conflict, before it goes too far, I'm willing to discuss terms. The agent nodded. It may be too late for that, Majesty. Fleet Admiral Ben Parker stood in the command center of the UHS Washington, humanity's most advanced warship, watching displays that showed the positions of both human and Zephyrian forces throughout the disputed region. Ben was a career military officer who had spent 40 years preparing for exactly this kind of conflict, though he had always hoped it would never come. Now that it was here, he intended to end it as quickly and decisively as possible. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving reports from all three colonial systems. The Zephyrians have begun their main assault." "Show me," Ben said calmly. The main display changed to show tactical information from the Ross 47 system, where the newest human colony was under attack. Dozens of Zephyrian warships had jumped into the system at once, expecting to overwhelm the small defensive force protecting the civilian population. What they found instead was a nasty surprise. The human colony appeared defenseless from space, with only a few patrol ships visible on sensors. But as the Zephyrian fleet moved closer to the planet, hidden defensive platforms emerged from beneath the surface and from concealed positions throughout the system. Advanced missile batteries opened fire simultaneously, filling space with hundreds of high-speed projectiles that the Zephyrian ships struggled to intercept. "The colony defense systems are performing exactly as designed," reported Colonel Amy Thompson from her position aboard a stealth ship hidden in the system's asteroid belt. Amy commanded Humanity's Special Forces operations, and her teams had spent weeks preparing for exactly this scenario. "Zephyrian casualties?" Ben asked. 12 ships destroyed in the first wave, Admiral. 8 more heavily damaged. They're trying to regroup, but our mobile units are moving to intercept." What the Zephyrians didn't know was that the patrol ships they had detected were actually advanced human warships, using holographic camouflage to appear smaller and less threatening than they really were. As the alien fleet struggled to deal with the unexpected defensive fire, these ships dropped their disguises and revealed their true nature. Captain Roy Henderson's HMS Defiance was among them. His ship had been hiding near the system's outer gas giant, using the planet's radiation to mask its presence. Now it accelerated toward the Zephyrian formation at speeds that should have been impossible for a vessel of its size. "Defiance 2. All units," Roy announced over the secure communication channel. "We are weapons-free. Show them what human engineering can really do." The battle that followed was unlike anything the Zephyrians had expected. Human ships moved with incredible speed and agility, appearing and disappearing from sensors as their stealth systems activated and deactivated. Their weapons were devastatingly accurate, cutting through Zephyrian crystal armor as if it were made of glass instead of advanced materials, but the real shock came when the Zephyrians tried to use their superior numbers to overwhelm individual human ships. Instead of being destroyed, the human vessels seemed to multiply. What appeared to be a single enemy ship would suddenly become 3 or 4, all firing independently and coordinating their attacks with deadly precision. "They're using some kind of holographic projection system," a Zephyrian commander reported desperately to his superiors. "We can't tell which targets are real and which are false images." The truth was even more disturbing. Humanity had developed drone technology that allowed a single ship to control multiple unmanned vessels simultaneously. Each human warship was effectively a small fleet in itself, capable of projecting force far beyond what its apparent size suggested. Within 2 hours, the Zephyrian assault on Ross 47 had been completely repelled. Half of their attacking fleet was destroyed or disabled, and the survivors were retreating in disorder. Similar scenes were playing out in the other 2 colonial systems, where human defenders were proving far more capable than anyone had expected. Dr. Marcus Webb was monitoring the battles from his position in the Human Intelligence Center on Earth. As reports came in from all 3 systems, he began to understand the full scope of what was happening. "Admiral Parker," he said over the secure communication link, "the Zephyrians are in complete disarray. Their tactics are based on the assumption that they're fighting a technologically inferior enemy. They have no idea how to respond to our actual capabilities." "What's your assessment of their next move?" Ben asked. "They'll try to regroup and bring in reinforcements. Counselor Vextara has staked his reputation on defeating humanity, so he can't afford to admit failure. But their military commanders are starting to realize they're not fighting the war they prepared for." That assessment proved accurate. Within hours of the failed assaults, Zephyrian reinforcements began arriving in the region. But instead of learning from their initial defeats, they simply brought more ships and tried the same tactics again. The results were predictably disastrous. Colonel Thompson's Special Forces teams had spent the brief lull between attacks infiltrating Zephyrian supply lines and communication networks. When the second wave of attacks began, the alien forces found their rear areas under assault by human commandos who seemed to appear from nowhere. "Target their command ships first," Amy ordered her teams. "Take out their coordination and the rest will fall apart." Human special forces had always been among the best in the galaxy, but they had kept their true capabilities secret for decades. Now facing an existential threat to their species, they held nothing back. Zephyrian commanders found their ships being boarded by enemies who moved through their vessels like ghosts, striking at critical systems before vanishing into the ship's own ventilation and maintenance systems. The psychological impact was devastating. Zephyrian crews began reporting that their own ships were haunted, that humans could somehow walk through walls and appear in sealed compartments. The truth was more mundane but no less impressive. Human technology had advanced to the point where their soldiers could phase through solid matter for brief periods, making them nearly impossible to contain or predict. Fleet Admiral Parker watched the battle reports with grim satisfaction. Humanity was winning, but he took no pleasure in the destruction of enemy forces. Every ship that was destroyed represented hundreds of lives lost, and he knew that this war would have consequences far beyond the immediate military victory. "Admiral," his tactical officer reported, "we're detecting a massive Zephyrian fleet movement toward our position. It looks like they're committing their entire reserve force to one final assault." Ben studied the incoming data. Over 500 Zephyrian warships were converging on the human colonial systems, led by Counselor Vexthara's personal flagship. This would be the decisive battle of the war. "Send a message to all human forces," he ordered. "Tell them it's time to show the galaxy who we really are." What happened next would be remembered as the Battle of Three Worlds, though it was really one coordinated engagement across three star systems simultaneously. The Zephyrian Empire committed the largest military force in its history to crush human resistance once and for all. Humanity responded by revealing capabilities that no one, not even their closest allies, had suspected they possessed. The HMS Defiance led a formation of human warships in a direct assault on Vexthara's flagship. But as the two forces closed with each other, the human ships began to change. Their hulls shifted and reconfigured, weapon systems emerged from hidden compartments, and additional armor plating extended to cover vulnerable areas. "Impossible," breathed a Zephyrian sensor operator as he watched the human vessels transform before his eyes. "Those ships are completely rebuilding themselves in the middle of battle." Captain Henderson smiled grimly from his bridge. "Now you see what human adaptability really means. We don't just prepare for war, we prepare to change the nature of war itself." The transformed human ships were faster, more heavily armed, and better protected than anything the Zephyrians had ever encountered. But more importantly, they were coordinated by artificial intelligences that could process battlefield information and adjust tactics in real time, something no biological crew could match. The battle was over in less than 4 hours. When the fighting ended, the Zephyrian Empire's military power had been effectively destroyed. Hundreds of their ships floated as dead hulks in space, while the survivors fled toward their home systems with news of humanity's overwhelming victory. Counselor Vexthara's flagship was among the few vessels to escape, but not before suffering severe damage. As his ship limped away from the battlefield, the crystalline being who had started the war stared at the tactical displays showing the extent of his defeat. "How?" he whispered to himself. "How did primitives defeat the might of the Zephyrian Empire?" His military advisor, one of the few senior officers to survive the battle, provided the answer that Vexthara was finally ready to hear. "They were never primitives, my lord. We were simply too arrogant to see the truth." Humanity has been preparing for this kind of conflict for decades, while we assumed our superiority would be enough to guarantee victory. As news of the human victory spread throughout galactic civilization, species that had remained neutral began choosing sides. The message was clear: humanity was not just another young species struggling to find its place in the galaxy. They were a major power that could defend their interests against any threat. The Great Assembly Hall of the Galactic Coordination Council had never seen anything like the scene unfolding before its thousands of representatives. Empress Kilandra of the Zephyrian Empire knelt in the center of the chamber, her once proud, crystalline form dim with shame and desperation. Around her, the representatives of hundreds of species watched in stunned silence as one of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful civilizations begged for mercy. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the human delegation's position, but today he was no longer just a diplomatic representative. The events of the past month had transformed him into the voice of a species that had proven its strength beyond any doubt. Behind him sat Admiral Ben Parker, Colonel Amy Thompson, and other military leaders who had just won the most decisive victory in recent galactic history. High Arbiter Qualden's ancient voice filled the chamber with carefully controlled emotion. Empress Kilandra, you have requested an emergency session to address the consequences of actions taken by members of your government. The Council recognizes your right to speak. The Zephyrian Empress raised her head, and those close enough could see that her inner light was flickering with exhaustion and grief. Honored representatives, I come before you to publicly disavow the actions of my brother, Counselor Vexthara. His threats against humanity were made without imperial authorization, and in direct violation of our most sacred laws and treaties. A murmur ran through the assembly. Many species had assumed that Vexthara's threats represented official Zephyrian policy, and this revelation changed the nature of the entire conflict. Furthermore, the Empress continued, I formally apologize to the human species and to this Council for the unauthorized military actions that followed those threats. The Zephyrian Empire accepts full responsibility for the consequences of this illegal war. Jake Morrison stepped forward when High Arbiter Qualden indicated it was his turn to speak. The chamber fell completely silent as the human representative prepared to respond to the Empress's plea. Your Imperial Majesty, Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast hall, humanity appreciates your words and recognizes the courage it took to make this public statement. However, words alone cannot undo the damage that has been done. He activated a holographic display that showed the devastation left behind by the recent battles. Destroyed ships, damaged colonies, and casualty reports filled the air above the assembly. For 3 weeks, Zephyrian military forces attacked human civilians, destroyed our merchant vessels, and attempted to drive us from systems we had legally claimed. Your brother's actions cost lives on both sides and violated every principle this council was founded to protect. The Empress's light dimmed further. What would humanity require to consider this matter resolved? Jake looked back at his delegation, then returned his attention to the Empress. The complete withdrawal of all Zephyrian military forces from human space and the surrounding regions. The payment of reparations for damage caused to human property and loss of life. And the permanent exile of Counselor Vexthara from any position of authority within your government. And if we cannot meet these demands, then humanity will be forced to ensure its own security through other means. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Everyone in the chamber understood that humanity now possessed the military power to enforce its will, if necessary. Dr. Marcus Webb, sitting with the human delegation, watched the faces of representatives from other species as they processed what they were witnessing. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted dramatically, and the political implications would be felt for generations. General Morgith entered the chamber at that moment, his massive crystal form moving with obvious reluctance. The Zephyrian military commander approached the center of the hall and knelt beside his Empress. Honored representatives, he said, I come to report that Counselor Vexthara has refused all orders to surrender his authority and return to Zephyr Prime. He has declared himself the legitimate ruler of the Zephyrian Empire and is attempting to rally military units still loyal to him. This news sent shockwaves through the assembly. A civil war within the Zephyrian Empire would destabilize the entire region and potentially drag other species into the conflict. Commander Morrison conferred quickly with his advisors, then addressed the chamber again. In light of this development, humanity is prepared to offer assistance to the legitimate Zephyrian government in restoring order within their territory. The offer was unprecedented. No species had ever volunteered to help resolve another civilization's internal conflicts, especially not immediately after winning a war against them. Empress Calandra looked up with surprise and hope. You would help us despite everything that has happened? Humanity has no quarrel with the Zephyrian people or their legitimate government, Jake replied. Our conflict was with Vextara and those who followed his illegal orders. We have no interest in seeing your empire destroyed by civil war. Admiral Parker stepped forward to provide the military details. Our forces are already in position throughout the region. With your permission, we can intercept Vexthara's remaining ships before they can cause further damage to your territory or threaten neighboring systems. What followed was a series of negotiations that would reshape galactic politics for centuries to come. The legitimate Zephyrian government agreed to all of humanity's demands in exchange for military assistance in ending the rebellion. Other species, seeing the wisdom of maintaining good relations with humanity's now obvious power, offered their own support for the peacekeeping mission. Within days, human and allied forces were moving through Zephyrian space systematically, neutralizing the remaining rebel units. Vexthara's followers, demoralized by their earlier defeats and facing overwhelming odds, surrendered with little resistance. The final confrontation came when Vexthara's damaged flagship was cornered in the outer reaches of the Zephyrian home system. Captain Roy Henderson's HMS Defiance led the force that surrounded the rebel vessel, cutting off any possibility of escape. Counselor Vexthara, Roy announced over an open communication channel, you are ordered to surrender your vessel and submit to the authority of the legitimate Zephyrian government. The response came after a long delay, and when it did, Vexthara's voice was barely recognizable. The proud, arrogant being who had threatened humanity before the entire Galactic Council now sounded broken and defeated. I will not surrender to primitives and traitors, he said, but there was no strength left in his words. Then you leave us no choice, Roy replied. The HMS Defiance's weapon systems locked onto the rebel flagship with perfect precision. One carefully aimed shot disabled the Zephyrian vessel's engines and weapons, leaving it helpless but intact. Zephyrian loyalist forces moved in to board the ship and arrest their former leader when Vexthara was finally brought before his sister on Zephyr Prime. The change in him was shocking. The crystalline being who had once radiated confidence and superiority now appeared dull and lifeless, his inner light barely flickering. Brother, Empress Calandra said sadly, your arrogance has cost our empire everything. Hundreds of thousands of our people are dead, our military is shattered, and our reputation throughout the galaxy is in ruins. Vexthara looked up at his sister with eyes that seemed to see nothing. They were supposed to be primitives. The humans were supposed to be weak and stupid. How did everything go so wrong? Because you never bothered to really understand them, the Empress replied. You saw what you wanted to see and ignored everything that contradicted your assumptions. Now, our entire civilization will spend generations recovering from your mistakes. The final terms of the peace agreement were signed in the same council chamber where the crisis had begun. Humanity received not just the 3 systems they had originally requested, but administrative rights over dozens of former Zephyrian territories whose populations had been displaced by the war. The reparations payments would continue for 50 years, during which time the Zephyrian Empire would essentially be a client state of humanity. Commander Morrison stood where Vexthara had once made his arrogant threats, but his words carried no malice or triumph. The human species bears no hatred toward the Zephyrian people, he announced to the assembly. We hope that this conflict will serve as a lesson to all galactic civilizations about the dangers of prejudice and the importance of treating all species with respect. High Arbiter Qualden closed the session with words that would be remembered for generations. Let it be recorded that on this day a new power has emerged in the galaxy. May all species learn from these events and work together to ensure that such conflicts never happen again. As the representatives began to file out of the chamber, Dr. Webb approached Commander Morrison with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think they'll really learn from this?" he asked quietly. Jake looked around at the alien faces surrounding them, seeing mixtures of respect, fear, and curiosity in their expressions. "Some will," he replied, "and those who don't will learn the same lesson Vexthara learned. Humanity is not going anywhere, and we're not the primitives some people think we are." President Elena Rodriguez watched the proceedings from Earth, knowing that this moment marked the beginning of a new era for human civilization. They had entered the galactic